When we talk about mental illnesses, what type of disorders, and would disorder be the right word, what type of disorders are we talking about?
Bipolar is one of them. Manic depression used to be called manic depression, which is a classic is mania, where they don't sleep, they spend money that they don't have, their sexual preferences change. They just on a high.
These are manic depressants?
Yes, that's
suffering from what, bipolar?
Well, now they call it bipolar. It used to be manic depression.
Oh, okay.
But it's the same thing.
Okay, so that's one of them. What other types of?
Schizophrenia. They hear voices, and paranoid, where they think someone's pumping gas in their apartment. Terrible. You know, I mean, delusional, paranoid.
You can think things like you're in your apartment, you're in the kitchen, you think the refrigerator is moving towards you, even though the refrigerator isn't moving towards you. You can smell smells that no one else smells. You can see things that no one else sees. Those can all be symptoms of schizophrenia.
And what other types of disorders?
Well, at the clinic, we see a lot of folks that come in with stress, anxiety, depression, and children with behavioral concerns such as ADHD and learning disabilities.
So do these disorders come on at birth, in childhood? Can they come on at any time?
Schizophrenia statistically usually comes on late teens, early 20s.
And it's something that just suddenly happens?
Well, there's probably a predisposition, and there's probably a trigger. You know, maybe it's academic stress.
So you're saying it might be a genetic component?
Partially, yeah.
Or a hormonal imbalance?
No, it's a chemical imbalance, supposedly less serotonin. But they do think it's somewhat genetic, and there's a trigger.
Like stress?
Yeah, or a death in the family, or they have a car wreck, or there's some trigger that brings it all to the surface.
And how does one know that you're going through some type of a mental challenge?
Well, incapacitation.
Which means?
Can't do anything, can't go to school, can't get out of bed.
That's true.
Suicidal ideations, hearing voices, just completely chaotic.
And they usually don't know, right? Usually our patients end up in the hospital, and that's where they're informed that they're suffering from a mental health
So somebody
illness.
else admits them?
Yes.
Or
their family members take them in, or they have to call 911 because, for example, a panic attack is so common, but they don't know what it is. They just know that they can't sit still.
They think they're dying, don't they, of a heart
do
attack?
think they're dying sometimes, and it's only when they get to the hospital is where, you know, a doctor verifies that they're having this issue, such as a panic attack. But otherwise, it didn't exist for them. They thought it was very normal.
Yeah, only a trained professional, a doctor, can really diagnose if someone has a mental illness or not. I know for myself, I had symptoms of depression even as a child. I didn't know I was depressed. I thought everyone thinks like I do.
How did you think? How do you remember thinking?
Well, I can remember being in kindergarten and the teacher asking us, class, what would you like to be when you grow up? And some people, I want to be a policeman, I want to be a doctor. I couldn't think of anything. I didn't think I'd live to see adulthood. In third grade, I thought I was going to die. I openly talked about wanting to die, but I just thought, well, everyone thinks like me and I'll outgrow it someday. It wasn't until much later when the sadness got so heavy that I couldn't work any longer, that I couldn't sustain relationships, that I couldn't sustain housing, that some friends finally convinced me to get some help, to go see someone.
So this was over a period of years that all of this kind of occurred to you, happened to you?
Yes, like I said, I felt sadness pretty much my entire life, and it wasn't until it finally got to the point where I really started to struggle with a lot of suicide ideation, until I even started to make attempts and be hospitalized, that I finally got the diagnosis of depression.
So when you made an attempt of suicide, was there someone around you who stopped you? What happened?
No, the times I attempted, my attempt would fail, but then I'd be in so much pain afterwards. I'd be like, wow, that was a really stupid idea.
What did you do? Take an overdose of pills or?
Well, I attempted by hanging 3 times, and I think a real turning point for me was after my 3rd attempt, because in the middle of attempting it, I started thinking to myself, a thought I'd never had before, gee, this is stupid. Why am I doing this? Not I'm stupid. What I'm doing is stupid. And that was the point when I really got the help that I needed.
So did somebody stop you at the other 2 times or find you or?
I was found the previous 2 times. I did the classic leave a note, let everyone know, saying goodbye. And so they'd call the police, and the police would be looking for me, and they'd find me after the attempt and call the ambulance and ship me off to the psychiatric hospital.
And then what would happen?
I'd spend some time in the hospital, and they might adjust my medication, because I've been on medication pretty consistently since, I want to say, the mid-90s. I was first diagnosed in 1994, put on medication for a while, and then went off medication for a while, struggled for several years, got back on medication, experimented with a number of different medications before I found one that worked. But then I had to deal with all the suicide ideation and the suicide attempts. And so, like I said, going to the hospital, having the medications changed up. And
So finally, what happened? You got the right medication?
yes, and
You were having therapy at the same time? Or were you?
I got into therapy shortly after that. It was in December of 2002 when I made that 3rd and final attempt, when I had that revelation of, this is stupid, why am I doing this? And yeah, I made my attempt. I pretty much sent myself to the hospital. I was like, okay, I've got to do something different. During that time, I had started to see a therapist who specializes in a therapy called dialectic behavior therapy. And that teaches a lot of awareness, being aware of what your triggers are, the way you think. It teaches you a lot of how to take ineffective behaviors and choose behaviors, actions that are more effective. So I was starting to see a therapist who specializes in dialectic behavior therapy, and we started to work on DBT shortly after that. And so he taught me a lot of symptom management. He taught me how to identify the thoughts I go to. He taught me more effective ways of coping when I'm in distress, instead of going to suicide or doing things I'd done in the past, like not going to work or things of that nature. So he just taught me more effective ways of coping. He taught me being aware of what I'm thinking and feeling. He taught me breathing exercises. Sometimes when I'm in distress, I'll do one where I'll stand in a quiet place and I'll say, breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I smile. Living in the moment, I know this is a wonderful moment.
So do you practice this on a daily basis or only when certain ideas, maybe depressive thoughts, begin to come on?
Oh, I practice it constantly. That's one of the things I really appreciate about DBT is they teach you to practice the skills before you need them. So when you're in distress, boom, they kick in.
Sure. Now, before we get to your story, Carmen, we have Jerry with us, Jerry Thompson, and I wonder if we can see him or hear from him. So, Jerry, have you been listening to us? Have you been listening to us, Jerry? Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Yes. So, would you like to add anything to what you've heard? We can see.
Christopher is. Hi. I think Christopher has been bravely a lot of experiences. The support peer to peer and family to family.
So we're not seeing you too well, Jerry. So maybe we'll come back to you when we can get the connection.
Okay.
When we can get the connection better.
Good.
Well, we can try it again. You were saying, let's see if we can try it again.
I had heard the last part of Christopher's talking about his challenges. I think he's a very brave individual and has really done well in his recovery of having his challenges. And the National Alliance for Mental Illness, our local group in San Mateo, tries to provide support for people when they're when they're having challenges to we have peer-to-peer groups and family-to-family, and it's not like a therapist, but somebody that's been there, somebody for support to somebody that is having difficulties. We also have family members that provide support for other family members.
Sure. Now, you're the president of the board. Have you been involved for a long time, and how did you get involved?
Well, my background, I taught health visiting for Samuel Merritt University, going to the general meeting they have 6 times a year at Mills Peninsula Hospital. Found that I was attracted to the people that were there and the support that they did, and they were seeing the individuals that have different mental health conditions for who they were and not just their condition. I saw it as a really positive thing. I wanted to incorporate that into my curriculum with my school and just sort of to live it. I think it's a really good organization, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. We'll have an opportunity to get back to you. Now, Carmen, you have your own experiences that you draw upon doing the work that you do for.
Right, and that's really helped me to be very stable. Creating something that has been so painful and helping people, it changes the dynamics of the illness into something positive.
So, tell us something about your background.
I was raised in San Francisco, and I thought everybody was pretending to be happy. 5 years old in the playground, and so I just assumed everybody was pretending, and that was my premise. And it worked pretty well. I went to Sacred Heart in Menlo Park then, now it's in Atherton. Went to University of California, became an airline stewardess, always suffering. Big circles under my eyes, 23 years old, you know, educated and attractive and all that kind of stuff, and yet I was exhausted all the time. When you're on stage, it's exhausting. Mm-hmm. And I married Mr. Wright and had baby Wright, and we living in Oklahoma City, which was a far cry from San Francisco. And I just started withdrawing, tried to drown myself in a lake.
Oh dear.
And I'm a good swimmer, but you're not a good anything when you're that ill. Mm-hmm. And I ended up in a hospital. And
so you tried to drown yourself in a lake. Did somebody?
Lake Hefner. Pardon me?
Did somebody come out to get you?
My mother-in-law was staying with us, and she called my husband in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He was at a meeting, and he said to call the state troopers.
So she saw you in the water?
She was babysitting, taking care of us. Needless to say, I was too sick to take care of my child. Mm. So my mother-in-law came to stay with us when my husband was away.
So when you tried to drown yourself,
I drove myself to the lake and tried to drown myself, and I wasn't home, and she was worried, and she called my husband. And in Lancaster, he was at a meeting and said to call the state troopers. It was a state lake.
So did they go to the lake looking for you?
They went and fished me out.
Is it that she had a feeling you were in the lake? Or?
Yeah.
Ah.
I used to go there when I wasn't feeling well. Mm. So they just assumed I was at the state lake. And they fished me out. I was in the hospital for 8 months, and then I was went into catatonia. In other words, you just...
That's a catatonic state where,
yes.
What, you don't speak to anybody? Or?
Mm-mm. And I was in a hospital in Maryland, in Shepherd Pratt Hospital in Towson, Maryland, for 5 years.
Just committed?
I was committed, yeah.
So were you in touch with your family all at that time?
Just my husband had to come up periodically to Shepherd Pratt because his company was paying catastrophic insurance. And he had to come up every 6 months to give a progress report to his company. It wasn't unusual for companies then to have catastrophic insurance, you know.
So who was taking care of your child?
She went back to Florida to stay with my in-laws. Mm. She was there for 4.5 years.
So how long did all of this take place?
I finally got well when I was about 45, and I'll be 79 next month.
And so how did you, what put you on your road to recovery?
I think I started the Peninsula Network of Mental Health Clients way back when, and it was, it didn't go over because people were in fighting and all this kind of thing. And then I started the Stamp Out Stigma program, and I think that's really gave me the wellness to go on. It was just a very rewarding thing to do, to pay back and help consumers to understand and be able to give back to the community. And I think that's sort of my turning point. And like Christopher, he was proactive. You have to be proactive in your illness.
Well, I think to be proactive, you have to be aware that you're ill, and you also have to be want to get better, I guess, and believe that you can get better. That there are specific steps.
I always knew there was something better. You always feel. I was in the state hospital 3 times for suicidal acting out, and I just knew there was something better.
And so, what was the final diagnosis for you?
Clinical depression.
Clinical depression. And what was done?
A lot of talk therapy. I have a psychiatrist here that I've seen for 30 years, and he says we're going to end up in the old folks' home together, and I'll be pushing his wheelchair.
And you no longer get depressed? You'll be pushing his wheelchair?
A little bit, but nothing like before.
Oh.
And I have tools, what I know what I need to do. Stress. You mentioned stress, Christopher. Stress is very difficult.
So are
Undue
you
stress.
also on medication?
Very little. Very,
Yes.
very little.
So, Veronica, we've heard some of Chris's story and some of Carmen's story. Are there stories, exceptions in terms of some of the people that you see at the clinic?
Well, you know, I'm not a clinician, but I do meet with our patients. I meet and greet them and provide a program overview. And, you know, I think that it's difficult. Our families usually aren't as open about what they're feeling or experiencing. So it's very hard to hear, as much as I've heard from both of you today. But are there exceptions, you asked? Are there exceptions to?
In terms of the patients that come to the clinic, do you know some of the stories of the patients and some of the things that they deal with?
Just the families in East Palo Alto, there's a lot of psychosocial issues, stress related to being unemployed, housing, the lack of housing, not being able to pay the enormous rent. And they have larger families. They live with a lot of other families in a small place, so a lot of those issues kind of affect them. And they come and request, or they don't request the service, but we notice that they do need help, and that's when we attempt to connect them. But you know, you mentioned that you have to be aware of what you have, and a lot of our families are not. A lot of these individuals don't know. They think that this too will pass. They don't. There's stigma. They don't agree or believe that they should see someone. That they have stress, that they have anxiety, or that they are depressed, and they aren't willing to take medication as well. So a lot of the work that we do in the clinic is provide education around mental health, education on the work that we do, and we hope that they learn of the services that we have. And usually it takes some families about 6 months to finally accept the service.
So what brings them to the clinic? Given the fact that you said they don't think that there's anything wrong.
They come because they have a medical concern that they come and see their doctor about. But really what consumes the entire session is relationship issues with their partner, or housing issues, or the fact that they have headaches and they want to go see a specialist, clearly not a counselor, because they have migraines, but they don't associate it with stress. They associate it with a body, like a physical problem. So they want the doctor to give them something for that, when in fact they're cleared of any medical issues.
So what generally happens?
So what generally happens is the doctor introduces our program and says, well, you know, I think that you might benefit from seeing a counselor here at our clinic. And so because they trust their doctor, then they will trust our clinicians to come in, and we call this a warm handoff, where the medical doctor introduces our program, one of us, myself, or one of the clinicians, and invites us over to the exam room to talk a little bit about what we do at the clinic, to put a face to the name that, you know, maybe reduce that stigma and say, this is Veronica, and Veronica can help you with that stress that you're talking about.
Veronica just now mentioned that stigma. And Carmen, you're the director of an organization called Stamp Out
Stigma.
Stigma. So what stigma are we talking about?
That you're weak, you're dangerous, you never bathe, you're stupid, violent, crazy,
That you're
psychotic,
crazy, yeah, if you go see a
all that,
counselor.
and that you're a drain on society, that you're leeches.
So where did all of this come from?
Through the years, I think it started probably way many hundreds of years ago when they were in asylums.
So do you think maybe with the rise in homelessness and some of the symptoms that the homeless people have, that's what's come to be thought of?
Well, I don't think there weren't any homeless people when I was growing up. I think it was when Reagan closed the state hospitals, and then I saw an influx of homeless people emerge.
So when you were growing up, was there still those ideas?
Still stigma. Nobody talked about it. It was like cancer was 20 years ago. It was hush hush. And my brother committed suicide, and he could have probably had help, but nobody talked about it.
When did he commit suicide?
He was 37 in 1972.
How far apart are you?
A year and a half.
He was older.
Yeah.
And he committed suicide before you.
Yeah.
Was that a tip-off for you? What effect did that
No,
have on your family?
He was. I was living in Texas then, and I wish I could have been here to help him. I could have helped him, probably, you know. But he suffered from depression.
So it might have been something genetic that ran in your family.
Well, it was the way we were raised too. I think a lot of it. I was put in boarding school. He was kicked out of 20 schools, so it was obvious that he had some problems. Every school he went to, he was kicked out of. You know.
Did your parents attempt to deal with it? I mean, what was
Well,
the
they got him out of jail when he ended up in jail, but they didn't pursue psychiatric. You have to understand, those days, seeing a psychiatrist was, even now, I mean, it's not in our family when I was a psychiatrist.
Still happens, still exists.
Yes, it
Absolutely
does.
does.
And I think when we hear of stories in terms of maybe people in the military who need help,
Yes.
the idea is that they don't go because they would have to admit it, and it would be something on their record.
Especially a man, too, weak.
Yes, right.
It would indicate that this man, they don't want to appear weak.
That's
They already are suffering. I mean, the military.
Yeah,
They've
you
said that they don't want to appear like they can't handle their life.
Well, men, I think, in general, because most of our patients are women.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
hear that a lot. You know, oh, you're a man. You suck it up.
Yeah.
Yes, right.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was told by plenty of people who've heard that. I've seen psychiatrists and that I was seeing a therapist. Oh, you know, you're weak. You can't handle your problems.
Oh. That certainly doesn't make you feel any better. That probably makes you feel, weak?
Well, at the time, I think I felt very judged. It doesn't affect me the same way it used to when people make comments like that about, you know, yes, I still see a psychiatrist now, and yes, I take a medication at a very low dosage, but I'm not. We touched on stigma earlier, and from my own experience, I know there's 3 types of stigma. There's stigma that society has towards a person. There's stigma, unfortunately, that care providers can have towards the people they treat. And there's your own personal stigma. And really, my own personal view about mental illness was what I had to overcome, even though, you know, my own thoughts about, gosh, I'm dealing with this pain, and then receiving that from the people around me that I turn to for support. But as I've done some studying and research on my own, I've come to understand, okay, this is what I'm facing, and this is what I can do about it.
So what were you mentioned your own stigma. What did you place on yourself?
Well, when I was first hospitalized back in the spring of 1994, and I was diagnosed with major depression, all my thoughts were, I'm going to spend the rest of my life institutionalized. I'm never going to have any kind of life. I'm never going to get a college degree. I'm never going to get married. Society's going to disown me. I'll never have a career. I'll never make anything in my life. And also, I don't want to be crazy. I'm going to have to depend on these pills for the rest of my life.
It limits your skills. It limits your ability to use your skills.
And so how does one work one's way out? That seems like such a vicious circle of thinking. That when you're going through certain things and you're judging yourself, I mean, you're placing those conclusions on yourself. I'll never do this, I'll never do that. I won't be this, that, or the other. How do you work your way out of that?
I don't
With
know if
dialectic behavior therapy.
you have limitations, and you have to recognize that you get sick again.
Dialectic behavior therapy and cognitive behavior therapy helped me to overcome those thoughts.
So you have to see somebody, generally speaking. You can't do it yourself. Can you
it's-
do it yourself?
It's
No.
not universal across the board. Some people can. Some people have enough willpower. Myself, I needed the additional supportive therapy. I needed the cognitive behavior therapy, which teaches me how to look at the thoughts I'm having, see if these thoughts are true. When I'm feeling really sad, and I do still feel sad sometimes, I'll automatically go to thoughts of, I'm no good, I shouldn't be around, no one likes me. Well, then I'll look at the evidence. In the apartment complex I now live in, during the summer, my neighbors will have barbecues. They'll come knock on my door. They'll make me come join them, even if I don't want to. I recently had surgery on my right eye to reattach a detached retina. Every day, people are calling me saying, how's your recovery? Do you need anything?
So because you have a circle of friends.
So I look at the evidence. Okay, these thoughts aren't true. I am worthwhile. People wouldn't do this if I wasn't.
You said something very important that's a part of the stigma. You said some people have enough willpower. Now, you had already said, Carmen, that people think, oh, you're weak. So
Morally faulty.
So these people who have the willpower, what did you mean by that?
What did I? Well, some people are able to, without the additional support, realize, okay, I'm thinking this way, but I know this thought isn't true.
They
Some
have
people
good
are
coping skills, right?
right. Some people, whether it's through reading books or just through their own life experience, they're able to say, no, I know this isn't true, and I'm not going to entertain this thought. And some people need that additional support to figure out, okay, how do I change the way I think?
But some people living in a board and care, that's all they want. That they don't know that there's. I was telling you, it's like having a car in the desert with no gas.
Right.
You have everything going for you, but you can't make it work. And some of the folks that, a lot of the folks that are in the mental health system here choose to live in a board and care home. They don't seem to want anymore. I don't know what it is. We've asked ourselves that. You know, how come we want to move on and you want to get the inertia, you want to give them a.
So could it be perhaps that those people who don't want to move on may feel so beaten down
Yes, I think it's a lot of it.
by everything that they've gone through that they
think that's a
really
lot of
don't
it.
have the confidence to think that they can actually do it?
Probably
I'm
so.
just thinking of some of the things that you said. Are these young people? Are they older people?
No, they're
How-
people that have been in the system a long time.
Yeah.
My age and down.
And have they received positive feedback?
Well, I don't know. Now, we have some on our panel that do very well. And, they seem to thrive when they become panelists. They seem to want to move on because they're contributing something. But then other people just. And in the culture, you know, like the folks that are from the Spanish folks and all, they have the cultural difficulties as well.
Yes.
You know, they have a different view. They have a worse view of mental health difficulties.
Sure, and one of our guests was going to talk about some of the cultural differences. Jerry, did I hear you say something? Are you there?
Yeah, I am. I was actually just talking to the pizza guy.
Ah.
Sorry, I'll try to be quiet.
Well, anyway, we were talking about the stigma and the some of the options that people have. Do you feel? Do you see that stigma that we talk about prevalent in some of the clients who you run into?
Absolutely. Our families don't want to be labeled by society, And that's the first thing that happens in our community when they mention that they're going to meet with a counselor. Neighbors and family members say, don't go, don't go. It's for crazy people. And by the way, if you have kids and you tell them that you have this problem, your kids are going to be removed from your care. So our families won't come. Individuals won't come because of that pressure that society has placed on them to access services, and so they go on and end up kind of doing things or managing on their own, and in fact, not very successfully, because they won't take medications for that same reason. Even if they don't access counseling services, they have a problem taking medications because they don't want to be dependent on it. I think you had mentioned something about folks being dependent on medication, and
They probably won't let their kids play with certain kids either.
they won't let their play. Yes, right. And then they hear. I think every patient is unique, right? But if someone has ADHD and their symptoms are very different than your kid who's hyperactive, they'll say, "Don't put him on meds because you're going to end up like so and so." So it is really hard with our population to educate them around these services, and that societal stigma is probably the worst one. And so I try to tell them, like, don't talk to your neighbors about it. You know, you have us. You can rely on us. You can rely on your primary care doctor. You can talk to our counselor, who are professionals and can guide you through this. We're here to help, and come.
Do you work with a lot of single-parent families?
Yes, we do.
And that causes a problem too.
Oh, yes. I would think so. The fear that I guess the stress of being a single parent.
Yes.
And then the fear that if you say something,
Your
your
kids
your children will be taken away.
That's correct.
So how do you deal with that? Do the people that you say don't listen to your neighbors, do they in fact heed your advice?
I think so. You need, with counseling, you need to be able to connect to a counselor, and I feel that I connect very well with most of our patients. I would hope so, and I would hope that that they take my advice. We do see them coming in, so I'm thinking that they do take my advice, and our entire team is really committed to providing a good service. So they're very aware. They're all bicultural, bilingual, and they're aware of
Do you get
the needs
referrals
in
from
our-
the schools too?
We also get referrals from the schools, and we work very closely with the regional San Mateo County's Behavioral Health and Recovery Services.
So when you get referrals from the schools, is that about the children?
It's usually about the children and
What,
concerns.
children acting up in the
Yes,
classes?
acting up, or reports of cutting, or using their pencils to cut themselves. There's so many different things, but we have some counselors in the district, but they mostly provide emotional support. So our clinic, we have licensed providers that can do full assessments and evaluations, and to support the children and their families.
Sure.
Do
Now,
do you provide any supports for the parents as well? or just
Absolutely.
the-
A lot of the work that we do is around parenting support, teaching parents how to discipline their children or how to identify certain behaviors and what to do about that.
and so you find the situations improving?
Yes.
For
well,
those who
for those who come back. So they
do most come back?
Well, a lot of folks don't, but we still have a nice amount of people that do come back to receive treatment. But I think that, we provide brief supportive counseling, and so regardless of the number of visits that we see you for, we can see you for as long as you'd like.
Free of charge or on
You have
some type of?
Medi-Cal, Health Plan of San Mateo, Healthy
So money wouldn't
Families.
be an issue in terms
We also
of...
offer a sliding fee scale. It shouldn't be an issue, but it is an issue for our families. However, most of them have Medi-Cal.
Sure. So Jerry, I don't know if you can join us. Can you hear us, Jerry? We're talking...
Very poorly.
But you heard that. So we're talking about stigma, and I'm wondering, do you deal with stigma in any way in what you do? Is that a topic that's addressed at all with the organization?
I'm afraid I'm not hearing very well, but I did hear you say that you were talking about stigma, and stigma is a very big challenge in the community. It's something that we try to work to disperse, but it often is the biggest challenge with trying to have people getting engaged and back is holding them back. And often people, even the stigma will discourage them from even seeking help.
And so how do you deal with that? You said it's something that you're trying to deal with it. How does your organization deal with it?
I'm not hearing very well, but I have to apologize because I'm mostly just getting static.
Oh, I see. Well, I'm sorry about that. We'll simply have, yes, go on, Christopher. We're moving on, Jerry. Thank you.
Well, NAMI does have a lot of educational programs that are geared towards educating people and helping to deal with the stigma that a lot of us encounter. We have the In Our Own Voice presentations, which I take part in, where we go out into the community and we share our story. We talk about our dark days, what it was like for us when we were first being diagnosed. We talk about our acceptance, what acceptance means to us, how we came to accept our condition. We talk about treatments that we've tried, what's been successful, whether it's therapy or medication or ECT, electric convulsive therapy. We talk about, what's the next one, our coping skills, what helps us get through each day. And then we end off with our hopes, success, and dreams, what we hope to do with life, what we dream about, where we hope to go with life. We have a peer-to-peer mentoring, a 10-week free course that we offer to people in the community dealing with a mental illness. It's taught by 2 trained people who live with mental illness, who have experience living with mental illness. We have Ending the Silence, where 2 of us go into high schools. We do a little presentation about different mental illnesses, what the symptoms are, what to watch for.
So what prompts your presentations? Do groups request that you make a presentation, or do you reach out to individual groups? How does that come about?
A little of both. I go out into the community and, hi, I'm Christopher. I'm with NAMI In Our Own Voice. I'm a board member. I'd like to share with you what my journey has been like. I try to go to places like psychiatric hospitals or some of the behavioral health and recovery clinics. A lot of the clinicians only see us at our worst, and so they get kind of that jaded view about us. And so I want to help people see, hey, your work makes a difference. You know, you saw me after a suicide attempt. Well, here I am 12 years later. I'm working full-time as an assistant.
That's impressive.
Oh, thank you. And I'm working full-time as an assistant director at Heart and Soul, a nonprofit consumer-run organization in San Mateo County. I'm very involved with NAMI. I volunteer with 5 different projects with them.
So go on, finish your sentence. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, that's okay.
So when you reach out to groups and you begin to tell your story, what type of feedback? What's the worst feedback that you've received?
I think the worst one I received was just directed at me personally, which was, well, you shouldn't be up there telling your story. And it's like, oh, okay, that's your opinion, and I respect it.
So I guess that's part of the stigma in terms of...
I feel that most of the people, and we've reached about 500,000 people directly, I think they see us as courageous rather than pathetic after our presentation.
Well, it seems to me, you know, you're no longer... One can't say, given the numbers 1 in 4, that people who have mental health issues are the exceptions or on the peripheral. They're all around us.
Exactly.
Including a lot of people that we know,
Exactly.
like
That's right.
yourselves. So how do we begin to get that message out, more acceptance and...
Well, it's the shootings and all we were talking about earlier. I think you have to get these people in school, in elementary school. But then you have the civil rights, how, like the young man in Santa Barbara, how can you take him out of circulation when he hasn't done anything?
But at the same time, he supposedly was in therapy since he was about
Exactly.
8 years old.
And taking medication.
So,
probably.
so how? I think one person said he was off his medication at the time. But how do you deal with somebody like that who is in therapy on medication?
Yeah, I don't know now. There's what about AB 1421? You know what that one is? Isn't NAMI supporting that?
Well,
Is that the legislation that would
The
coerce,
forced treatment?
force people?
well, there's Laura's Law, which San Mateo County is in the process of deciding, okay, where do we stand with this? But that would be within a 36-month period if there are 2 incidents within that time, whether it's suicide attempts and hospitalizations or violent behavior, refusal to take your medication, things of that nature. Then the family can intervene and have this person sent to the hospital. And then they have to agree, okay, I'm going to take my medication, I'm going to take part in these programs, I'm going to take part in this therapy.
Who has to agree?
Well, that's
the
part
patient?
of, right, the patient
It's
has
like
to
this
agree
young
to.
man in Santa Barbara. What do you do?
So if the person doesn't agree,
Yes, right. That's usually the case. Our children do not agree. They don't want to listen to their parents. They don't want to go. Usually that happens around 12 to 18 years old, and as soon as you reach 18, which was something we were talking about, it really is up to the individual to want to access services on their own. Under 18, it's really the parents that can bring them in, but in our communities, we see that parents have a very difficult time convincing their child to come and receive services.
so it seems almost as if you're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
People
It's
have
very hard.
rights, but then at the same time, should there be a limit to their rights if they are a potential danger to themselves or to others?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. It's a civil rights thing again. You know, how can you take them? How can you put them in a jail or what if they haven't done anything yet?
But you end up waiting for them to do something
Yes,
wrong so
and
that
then
they
it's
can
so
go to
evil,
They can go
wrong.
to jail and then
But,
access services.
The
there.
problem with that young man or the people like him, if the media, in reporting it, would tell about what happened, of course, then put in a little blurb about the positive and that people aren't all violent and that's very unusual, and try to build a little counterbalance.
So it's very interesting you say that that's unusual, and yet what we see in the media when it comes to people with mental health issues is the negative, that they are violent, that
Yeah.
they are a danger to themselves and a danger to others. And you're saying that that's a myth, that's a misconception.
Well, no, the people that do the bad things, of course, they're violent and they deserve what they get. But it's not all people, and the media appears to like it's everybody that's mentally ill is like this.
We just never hear of the positives with people
Yeah.
that do have that are bipolar, are successful.
Famous people, a lot of famous people.
Catherine Zeta-Jones is my understanding. She's bipolar.
Edgar Allan Poe.
We didn't know this until recently, right? Because she was hospitalized. And that was news to me, but then folks start connecting. I think when you hear that, you're like, well, we start normalizing that, right? And saying, okay, well, she's just like us, or, you know, this is okay. It's okay to have, and maybe you can start the conversation that way. But when you only hear of negatives, it is very hard to open up.